Okay, so let's get started. Let's create a new project. App, let's say Swift Basics. Next, desktop, create. Done. Now, a quick revision on what on the concepts that we have learned. Where, uh, firstly, sure. So, firstly, let's first do a quick revision of the things that we have learned till now. Variables and constants, where score equal to 0, constants, let name equal to a string Abhishek. Then let's see type annotations. Type annotation basically provides clarity to the type of that variable. So let's say here name is a string or score is an int. So what we can do is we can say let team score :int equal to 0. So we are just specifying that the team score is an int. This as of now is providing an additional readability, but we will see how effective type annotations are with optionals, where it is which okay. Then we have printing statements. So for printing, I can just print all of these values: score, name, and team score, and which will print. I can also use string interpolation to print something like score colon and then the value. And for the value, I can say score. So this basically will print score and then colon and then a space and then the value, which is 0. This is called next. We have data types. So we have seen string. So this is a string data type. This is an integer data type. We have double and float. So var price equal to 12.5. This is double. Now by default, Swift uh, defaults the decimal values to double. So if we would like to store price as a float, we can here use string type annotation. So I can say float. Also, if I say float, yeah. Also, if I have to say let's say cart value, or okay, let's talk about a bit more on integers. So let score my score equal to 0. Now I know that this is a match where an individual score may not be beyond 100. So let's say, or let's say this is a marks and the total number of marks is 100. So I know that at any given point of time marks cannot hold a value which is greater than 100. So in this case I don't really need that bigger storage space for marks. So what I can do is I can use int 8. Now int 8 has minus 127 to plus 128, something like that. So which fits in my usage. So I, instead of using so much of memory space, I can just use int 8 and I can use a lesser memory space. So we have, and then we have int 8, int 16, int 32, and int, which is by default int 64. Then let's again print these values so that it doesn't throw these warnings. Price marks, let's change it to let. Okay, done. Now we have seen data types, we have seen printing, type annotations, variable constants. Now let's see functions. So I am already inside a function of view read load. So let's go outside this function and let's write a function. Now for function, I have to write, let's say, a calculate function, a very simple function, or even before we go to calculate, let's say greet. And here I can say print and let's say hello. Now I can call this function and I can print hello as many times as I want. So I can print, I can call it twice and then hello will be printed twice. So I don't really, so this line of code might have multiple, this inside function, there might be multiple lines of codes which I would like to execute, again and again. So instead of writing all of that block of code again, I can just put it inside a function and then call it. Okay, so this is a basic function. Basic function. Now let's say function with parameters. So func, greet, and then name. And then we will use a type annotation here again. So we'll say string because name, the data type of name will be string. Now this function does not return anything. This is a function with parameters. So now this will also print hello and then the name. So what we can do is we can call this one greet and then we can pass in name, which will print hello Abhishek. Next, functions with parameters and return type. Func, greet, name, and then instead of printing it here, I will return it. I will return the greeting message. So the return type is going to be string because it is going to contain a string, the message. So let's say return hello name. So now instead of printing it, it is returning. So how do I call a function with a return type? I can say greet. Okay, so then there are two functions with the same name. So let's say I'll change it to greeting. Greeting and then name. So let's say Sneha, and then this function returns the message. So whatever this function returns, we need to store it somewhere, right? So we'll say let greeting equal to and then greetings, and then here we will print it. So now this function already prints it inside greet, but this function returns the message and then you can use it. So this function is, this is a basic function, this is a function with parameters, and this function is with parameters and return type. Okay, next let's see optionals. These are function calls. Yeah, fine. Now optionals. Optionals is used when we are not sure that a data may, so basically a data may or may not exist at runtime. So let's say I am developing an application where in most of the cases, right, the data will be coming from a web service, a REST API. So there might be a lot of possibilities that the data might not arrive at the front end. So there might be a API call failure, there might be a network failure, and for there can be numerous reasons why the data fetching may fail. So whenever we are fetching data from backend, there is a possibility that you may have nil data. So in those cases where we are unsure of the availability of data, we use optionals. So let's say we are working on a weather application where we are fetching temperature from an API. So we'll say var temperature, and then we'll use a string annotation here, and then after this we'll use a question mark because we are unsure that temperature has data or not. So at this point of time, as soon as we write this line of code, temperature is nil. So now by default temperature is going to be nil, and then whenever we have the data, it will have the data wrapped in optional. So let's see where temperature is, and then let's assign a value, temperature equal to, let's say, 23. Okay, in not integer, so not string, but and let's take it as an int 8. Now temperature is 23. Let's print the temperature. Let's run this and see what happens. So I'm expecting optional 23 to be printed. Optional because temperature is optional. So the value 23 is wrapped. So in order to extract the value, the actual value of 23, we need to unwrap this value. So we can see how that's done. Let this run. Okay, so here we are. We can see that optional 23 has been printed. Now we need to unwrap this. So there are multiple ways of unwrapping it. Unwrapping and optional. Uh, the first and okay, let's write a multi-line comment here. Force unwrapping, which we should never be doing it. Then we have if let, then we have guard let. What is force unwrapping? I can just say print temperature exclamation mark, and if I'll do this and if I'll run, I will get 23. But when I'm using force unwrapping, it basically tells the compiler that I am 100% sure that the value exists, which I will not be sure, right? Because the data is coming from a API. So most cases we will not be using, and this is highly not recommended way of unwrapping it. So, but still, in order, but still we need to know. Okay, if let is something which is more oftenly used. So let's say if let. So let's say how we can unwrap the data, unwrap the temperature data using if let. So I'll say if let, and then I'll create a variable, right? So I can say a variable name. So I can say temp is equals to temperature, and then inside brackets I can say print temp. Now this way, so this is not an ideal way. This will print optional 23 and this will print 23, which is the ideal way. Let's run and check. 23. So this is basically how in most cases we will be unwrapping optional. We will see guard let in the upcoming sessions, but for now let's use if let for unwrapping optionals. Raise dictionaries. To create an array, it is just like creating any variable or a constant, right? So I can say var students equal to, and then if I have to create one student, I will say Abhishek. If I have to create an array of students, I'll wrap it in a square bracket, and then I can add as many as I want. So let's say Mayank, let's say Sneha, let's say Babu. So there are 4 students. So basically students is now an array of student names, and currently there are 4 students in the students array. Now how do I access an array? Accessing elements in an array. So to access this, I can just say print students, and I can say either 0. So all of the array is indexed from 0. So the start of the index is 0. So this is my 0, 1, 2, 3. So student 0 is basically Abhishek. Now let's see. So either I can say student 0, or arrays also provide us some helper API. So I can just say first, and then this is actually the same thing. Let's run and let's see what happens. What does it print? As we can see, it prints Abhishek and optional Abhishek. Again, it prints optional Abhishek because it is unsure that the students has a data, the first element. So we can unwrap. Whenever you see optional, you can unwrap using iflet, the concept that we have just seen. Okay. Then we have next adding elements to an array. So to add an element, I can say students dot append, and then the appending element, the new element, should also be of the same data type of what is that array, right? So array is of a string of array of string. So I can only append string. So let's say a new student joins in. So I'll say Preeti. And then now students has five elements now, right? Abhishek, Mayank, Sneha, Babu, and Preeti. Okay. Now next, checking if array is empty. We can say if students dot is empty. Now is empty is also a helper function that is already provided to us uh, from, so for all the arrays we can make use of this. So I can say I can check is empty to check whether my students has data or not, and then if it has data I can access the element. Again, if I am accessing, I can always go and use optionals just to make sure that the data exists before printing or displaying it in a label. Okay, now dictionaries. Arrays is used to store all of these data together in an array, right? So let's say a bunch of student names or vowels, all of that we can store in an array. Dictionary, on the other hand, is used when we need mapping, when we need to map one data with another. So let's say where states and capitals, right? And then we can here say create a dictionary. So dictionary will have a key value pair. So let's say the key is of string. So let's say Karnataka, and then for Karnataka the key I can store a value Bangalore, right? Or maybe something like grades. So let's say grades, and then I can say A. A is the key, and then it does not necessarily be a string, so it can be any data type. So I'm mapping one. So the keys is a string, and the value is one. Now I can say I can add another element here. So I can say B. I can say 2, right? I can add elements. So add elements to dictionary. I can say grades, and then I can put a key here. So let's say C, and a value equal to 3. So this is how I can add elements to an array. I can also access elements in an array. So how I can access elements of a dictionary, sorry, of a dictionary. How can I access? I can say print grades, and arrays can be accessed using indexes. Dictionaries can be accessed using keys. So I can say A, and then so basically I'm passing here key, and then this will print 1, actually optional 1. So let's see, I have optional 1 printed, which I'll again unwrap to get out the value of 1. The reason why it is optional is because iOS is not sure whether A actually has the data, right? So because A may or may not have the data, it is optional. So you can unwrap it. So we have seen arrays, dictionaries, and now let's use all of whatever you have studied. Let's put it in a table, and let's see how all of that binds together in a table view. Project app, let's say table views. Swift storyboard, next desktop. Let's store it here. Okay. All right. So to implement a table view, again, pretty simple. I'll go to the main.storyboard first. I'll drag a table view. I'll put all of these as zeros. 0, 0, 0. Add 4 constraints. I'll drag this to the bottom. I'll update constraints. Done. I will drag and drop to the view controller and I'll say delegate and data source, which basically tells that the delegate and data source functions will be implemented in my view controller. I can add prototype cell as one. I can select the cell and I can set a reuse identifier as cell. I can put in name. I'm choosing it to be cell. I'll go back to my view controller and here let's implement the table view. So for implementing a table view, there are two protocols that we must follow. One is the delegate and one is the data source. The data source tells what is basically my data source, what will be the contents of that cell. And delegate tells how the appearance, how the height of each row can be and things like that. So delegate is basically for appearance and data source is for the actual data, right? So let's implement it. I can add those protocols here, but as a best practice, I'll create an extension and I'll add it there. So extension view controller, UI table view delegate, comma, UI table view data source. And inside this, I will implement the functions. So as soon as I have added these, I am getting a warning saying that I have added these protocols, but I have not really added the required functions of these protocols. I can click fix and I can get all of the functions that I must implement in order to implement a table view. Okay, so the number of rows in section and cell for we have two functions that we must implement in order to see a table view. So the number of rows in section actually tells how many cells I would want to be displayed when I am displaying this table view, right? So for now, firstly, let's create an array. Now, array, if I create an array here, if I create an array called students here, Abhishek, Babu, Sneha, Rahul, Tarun, Meg. Now, if I'm creating an array inside a function, so inside this function of uDidLoad, I can only access this inside the function, right? So any variable or constant created within a function is only valid or can only be accessed within the scope of that function. So students, I can access it here. So I can say print students. I can access it here, but I cannot access it here because this is again a separate function. I cannot access any variable that is created inside some other variable, another function. So I cannot do print students here. There is no students here, right? So what I have to do is the students, and I will need some array to be accessed in my number of rows and cell for row, right? In order for the table view to appear. So what I will do, I'll create the students array, the variable, outside the function. So I can say this outside all of these functions, but inside the class. So I can say var students, and this is of type string, and I can create an empty array of string. Then now instead of using var students now, because students is already created, I can just remove var here. So this creates an empty array of students, of strings, and here I'm assigning a value. So now students can be accessed here. So if you see now, I should get students. Here I have. Here we have. Okay, perfect. So now, number of rows in section, let's return the count, right? So let's say my students array has whatever is the count. So students dot count is the number of rows I want my table view to be. So if my table view, so currently it has, I think, 6 elements. So my table view will have 6 cells. Now we have cell forward index path. Now the return type of this function is UI table use cell. So definitely as it appears, I'll have to create a cell object, right? So I'll say let cell is equals to table view dot dq reusable cell with identifier. This identifier is the same that we added in the storyboard. So in the storyboard, if you remember, we entered cell as the identifier. So I'm using the same name, and here I'm passing index path. Now, what exactly this DQ reusable cell is, right? So all of these cell objects are created and queued for better memory management. So let's say I have 20 or 200 contacts. Let's say I have about 200 contacts on my phone book. Now, at a given point of time, the iPhone can only display a set of, let's say, 8 or 10, depending on the size of my iPhone. Let's say it shows 8 or 10 contacts at a given point of time. Now, I don't really need to create 200 cell objects, right? Because at any given point of time, I cannot see 200. I can only see maybe 8 or 10. So, what iOS does is, the way iOS handles this is, all of the cells that it creates, it stores it in a queue, and then as soon as we scroll up and as soon as one of the cells disappears from the screen, it reuses that particular cell which is now not visible for a new cell. So instead of keep creating cell objects, it is reusing from the queue, right? So this is basically the concept of DQ reusable cell. So now I have the cell object created. Now I can configure it. So cell.textLabel.text equal to, for now, let's just keep it as Abhishek. And then we'll see how we can access array here. Let's return cell. Let's run this and let's see what is displayed. So I am expecting Abhishek to be displayed 6 times. Here we are. Abhishek has been displayed 6 times because I have said that the number of rows I want is 6, which is the students.count, which is nothing but 6. And in cell 4, I'm saying that I want Abhishek to be displayed. Now, of course, I don't want Abhishek to be displayed. I want each of these student names to be displayed. So all I have to do is access these array elements. So instead of Abhishek, I can say students. And then if you remember, how do we access an array element? I can say pass. I can use a square bracket and I can use an index. Now, if I say 0, I will have Abhishek. If I say 1, I have Babu. But what I want is, for the first cell, I want Abhishek. For the second cell, I want Babu. So what I can do is, instead of passing 0 or 1, I can say index path.row. So what happens is, for the first cell, it will pass 0. So students.0 is going to be Abhishek, so it will print Abhishek. For the second cell, index.row will have the value of 1. So students of 1 is going to be Babu. So here Babu will be displayed. Let's run and check. Now here we are, we have all of the student names displayed correctly as expected.